broadcast on our YouTube page as well as our Facebook page, and you guys are more than welcome to share to your places as well. So I would just like to welcome everyone to today's NBC Sunday series, where every other Sunday we've been talking with amazing panelists about topics that are very pertinent to the metastatic breast cancer community. Today I am very honored and thrilled to be speaking with Andrew, Christian, and Jimmy, who are going to share their experiences living with a wife who has gone through metastatic breast cancer. And you know, even prepping for this conversation today, it's it's not easy. I'm going to put myself out there. This is not a conversation that's comfortable for me, and so I'm just going to put myself out there and say we have to have these uncomfortable conversations because that's how we grow. That's how we can honor and keep living through the people that we miss so much. And so it again is a huge honor for me to be partnering with Abigail and bringing you guys onto Breast Cancer Conversations, the podcast, and supporting survivingbreastcancer.org as a nonprofit and providing space for the husbands, for the caregivers, the co-survivors, the partners, and the families as we navigate this disease, which unfortunately I just found out on World Cancer Day earlier this week that breast cancer surpassed lung cancer in terms of the number one cancer death in the world. That, I mean, we got to do something. Something has to change. I don't know what the answer is, but having these conversations is a step in the right direction. So I just want to thank all of you for being here today. For those who are viewing on social media, you're more than welcome to put questions or comments in the chat. I'll be moderating that throughout today's conversation. And again, we just want to provide an opportunity to share stories and let people know that there's beautiful memories and opportunities for us to support each other on the good days and the bad days and all the days in between. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Abigail Johnston, who is here today and moderating our NBC Sunday series. So thank you, Abigail, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I'm always thankful for friends who, when I call them up with a crazy idea, like let's have a webinar series all about death, she says, yes, let's do that. So I'm so thankful for her and all of her technology expertise, because this would be such a fail if I was having to do that. So thank you, Laura, for the space and for all of your support. And this particular panel, as well as the panel we did last time, 2 weeks ago, with moms who have lost their daughters to MBC, and we will also be having a panel of kiddos who have lost their parents or their moms, probably specifically to MBC. The whole reason that I wanted to bring these conversations to this webinar series is because those of us living with metastatic breast cancer, it's easy to forget that our experience, our disease, what is happening to us, what is eventually going to kill us, is affecting everybody in our lives. And I think one of the primary relationships that are affected are those partnerships, those romantic relationships, those relationships with people where we have promised to do life until our death with this particular person. And while we have husbands speaking today about losing their wives to MBC, I think that this is not a gender type situation. It's not incumbent on having a legal relationship. It could just be whoever you're going through life with, who is your partner, who is the first person that you turn to when you are making decisions or living together, having children, etc., building a life together. So I don't want anybody to think that if you're not a husband, that this doesn't apply to you, because from my perspective, it does. So just from a format perspective today, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, then introduce their wonderful wives who have passed. And certainly if we've got some animals coming into the picture, Jimmy, that's great. I got a cat too who will probably show her face at some point. Christian's showing us his furry caregiver there. That's totally fine. In these days of Zoom and COVID and all of that, we're getting a window into people's lives that is different from anything else. and then I'm going to guide the conversation to, kind of as a walking through the process. So diagnosis, living with, and then as they transitioned, not to be no longer living. And then at the end, we'll talk about legacies, and we'll talk about how each of these husbands are continuing the legacy that their wives left behind. And I think you guys will be really, really excited to hear about some of the wonderful things that these guys are doing. But with no further ado, let's get to talking to who we have today. And I'm just going to go around our square here. So Christian, if you would like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi. Thank you, Abigail. Honored to be here. My name is Christian Garnett. I'm 35 years old, proud father of Felix, who turned 5 back in November. My wife, Emily, died from metastatic breast cancer back in March, end of March 2020. And yeah, coming up on a year, which is crazy. And we live in Westchester, New York, and yeah, that's me. And we said we're going to come back to wife intro later, right? So,
yes, Christian, what do you do for a living?
I'm a design engineer for a decorative lighting company, so I make very fancy lamps. And used to go to China about 6 times a year, but the last year have been homebound, trying to review samples and stuff via Zoom, which has been a challenge, as everyone's life has been a challenge, but hopeful to get back to normal soon.
Great. I think I've realized that people who come from different perspectives, I've got a couple of engineers in my family, will talk about things in a different way. So I think it's good to get an idea of where each of you are coming from for our viewers. So Andrew, can we come to you next?
Sure. Andrew Silver. I am the father of Noah Silver and the husband of Anya Silver, and I teach down here at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. And Anya and I taught down here for 20 years before she died in 2015.
And what subjects again do you teach?
I teach literature. So right now I'm teaching modern drama. I do American literature, and then I do a course called Building Community, where we go out and interview a lot of folks, and that I'll talk a little bit about maybe later on.
Wonderful. And he plays a mean guitar too, so don't forget that. Jimmy, can we come over to you?
Yeah, of course. My name is Jimmy Borton. I am best known for being the husband of Melissa Beck Borton. I am a film producer, and I live in Chicago, Illinois.
What kind of films would we have seen that you've produced?
The most recent one was Ginger. It was a feature-length dark comedy about a 23-year-old who was diagnosed with breast cancer, which is loosely based on me and Melissa's initial experience with breast cancer.
Great. And I had the great experience of getting to see that. I think it was 2019. It's been a little while. So it's a wonderful film.
Thank you.
So now I want to move to, I know we've talked a little bit about the women who have brought you here, but I'd like to just take a moment and talk about them individually. So Christian, would you tell us a little bit more about Emily and what made her so magnetic?
Yeah, so my wife Emily was an attorney who, it's funny, when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she told me that she felt like her entire life had been leading up to that moment, because she was always bizarrely interested in diseases, and specifically cancer, like from a very young age. And in her law career, she was an elder law attorney, so she did wills and trusts and estate law, and was a guardian and very involved in guardianships. So when she was diagnosed, she kind of treated her own cancer journey as like her own personal little research case study, because that was kind of what she did for other people. She helped them get their affairs in order before they died. She helped, before she got her law degree, she worked as a case manager at a nonprofit who worked with patients with HIV. And before that, she worked as a surgical coordinator and medical biller for an orthopedic surgeon. So, like, navigating the world of insurance, navigating end-of-life directives, and hospital appointments, and all of the various players that come into play when you have a chronic illness. She was like a pig in shit. Like, as bizarre as it is to say, like, she was kind of living her best life, in a really weird way. Not that she was happy about it, but she definitely found some purpose in it, as well as in the tremendous amount of advocacy that she did in the breast cancer community, her podcast, her blog, the play that I'll let Andrew talk about. She really crammed a lot of life into those 2.5 years. Really, I would, for many people, would probably consider almost a career's worth of work that she managed to get done. So it was, I think, she made a really big impact in a very relatively short amount of time, which I think is something you hear about again and again in the embassy community, because everyone's on the clock. And it was, she was definitely a force to be reckoned with.
She was a competitive swimmer too, wasn't she?
Yeah, competitive in a lot of things. Just a competitive person. Didn't like someone telling her she couldn't do something or shouldn't do something. That was a surefire way to get her to do it. But yeah, she was a swimmer. She ran the New York City Marathon, which was a bucket list thing of hers. She was an amazing mother, an amazing daughter, incredible wife, just an overall amazing human.
I think one of my favorite stories about Emily was when she was taking the bar exam, that she made friends with the person sitting next to her, such that that person was Facebook friends with her years and years after they took the bar exam together. That was Emily.
Yeah, that's peak Emily right there. Yes, the person she sat next to at the bar exam sent me an email when she died and was like, I know this sounds weird, but I met her at the bar exam and have followed her ever since. Like, no, that doesn't sound weird. If you know Emily, it does not sound weird at all.
No, not at all. Andrew, would you talk about Anya?
Yeah, listening to Christian talk, I'm struck by the impossibility of summing up our wives in this kind of fashion. Emily was just, she defied words, you just have to be there to feel that kind of energy. But then the other thing that really strikes me about it is that cancer, and this is probably true for Melissa too, that cancer was absolutely transformational in her life. And this has to come with a quick caveat that Christian said, which is that they knew, I know that Anya knew that cancer was a gift to her poetry, but she would have turned down that gift and burned all of her poems if she could have spent another day here. And so it's a strange thing. So Anya was a poet. She had written since she was like in 7th grade. She had written a book or something and moved into poetry and started publishing when she was in college. And when I met her, she was this kind of unflappable force of nature. She, like Emily, but she had a kind of quiet power to her. She would go up. I used to act and I would get very jittery before I'd get on stage, and Anya was just cool as a cucumber. She'd get up there on stage and start reading with just this enormous confidence in her work, and she was just had this gift with the sensuality of language in her poems, with turns of phrase and images and metaphors that were just absolutely striking. I don't know where she came up with them. And when she was diagnosed with inflammatory breast cancer when she was pregnant with my son Noah, with our son, I want to say that there were times when she wanted to give up poetry, that, you know, she was getting rejection letters. She was getting a series of second place finishes in a bunch of different poetry contests. And then I think cancer gave her what she called, well, she's quoting Emily Dickinson, the flood subject. For Dickinson, that's mortality. And it just put her poetry into another world. I want to keep, I'm mindful of brevity. I'm just going to say, I could talk for a long, long time. She is also incredibly kind, incredibly tender, a deeply spiritual person who didn't shy away from very difficult questions, and also the funniest person that I'd ever known. Though I think that that there's a tie with Emily Garnett there. but both such funny people, and you know, I loved her dearly. We were married for 20, just about 20 years. Yeah.
I have to say that Anya's poetry puts the experience of metastatic breast cancer into language that is it's a heart language from my perspective, reading her poetry. And for any of you who are listening and want to learn more about the experiences of somebody living with this disease, I have bought and given at least a dozen of each of her books to people, because it just captures so much of the nuance of what it's like to be alive while your body is literally crumbling. So her poetry has been something that has really resonated with me. So her books are on Amazon, and I would definitely encourage everybody who's listening to consider purchasing her poetry. And of course, we'll get to the play, which features some of her poetry as well. And she's really had a gift.
Going through Emily's books after she died, looking at notes that she'd written, and found a book of Anya's poetry that Emily had that was very heavily dog-eared. And I believe we have not yet had a memorial service for her, because she died literally as COVID blew up, and we waited so long that I was like, there's no point in rushing it until I can get all of the hugs that I missed out on the first time around. Yeah. So we're waiting until everyone's vaccinated and we don't have to worry about it. But she has a bunch of directives, as we'll get to when we get to that part. But I think there's at least one poem of Anya's that she mentioned as being a possibility for being read at her memorial.
Yeah. So somebody asked what books where to start, and probably her most optimistic book is 93rd Name of God, which is the first book she wrote, and she was still, I think she was in remission for part of that book. But if you can cope with the darker material, I think I Watched You Disappear would be, if I had to pick one volume of those 4 volumes, which one I would pick, which was written from the metastatic experience specifically.
I believe that's the one that I found.
Yeah, Emily liked that one.
Emily did not shy away from dark.
Jimmy, can we come to you and talk about Melissa and how just her life story as well?
Yeah. So Melissa was, I mean, at the end of the day, she was an artist. I actually met her in film school. We were at Loyola in college together studying film, and she was the one person, we got partnered up, and she'd always kind of challenge any idea I had of what makes great cinema and how to tell a great story. She always had her own thought, and she wouldn't budge from that. And we ended up really working together and having kind of a synergy to our work together. But I think she had multiple diagnoses. So when we wrote Ginger, that was shortly after she was diagnosed when she was 23, and that was very early stage breast cancer. So most of the time we were told, she's going to be okay. There's nothing really to worry about. And then later, when she was 28, she was diagnosed metastatic. But throughout that time, she was always trying to help other people in her situation. She wanted her story to resonate with someone else, especially because when she was 23, when we were both 23, when we were dating, she, it was one of those things where we didn't see a lot of people in our situation who were 23 years old, just got out of college, trying to find our first jobs and, get hit with a cancer diagnosis. And so I think for her, it was about using her art to help somebody.
It sounds like a consistent theme throughout all of your wives, that they used what they had and they used their strengths in very different ways to be able to pass on something of themselves. And I think each of them really has done that. So what I want to go to next is the diagnosis. So if, again, try to keep these stories not too long. I know we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but if you could focus on not just what happened, but how you individually felt at the time of the metastatic diagnosis. I know Melissa and Anya had an early stage diagnosis, but I want to focus on the metastatic piece when each of your wives were told that there was no chance of curing what their diagnosis was. So Christian, could you talk about how you felt when Emily was told that she was actually stage 4? I know she went through a little bit of similar to me where they thought maybe she was early stage and then discovered she was actually metastatic.
Yeah, Emily was initially diagnosed as stage 2. Her primary care doctor during a routine physical found a lump, said you should get an ultrasound. It's probably nothing. It's probably a cyst from breastfeeding. She was breastfeeding at the time, or had just finished breastfeeding. And had the ultrasound. They said, let's do a mammogram. Did the mammogram, let's do a biopsy, come back this afternoon. At that point, when they said, come back this afternoon, we immediately, Felix was still with us. He was on my lap in the waiting room that whole time. And we said, okay, we got to drop the kid off somewhere. And as soon as we figured out where to drop Felix off, she looked at me and goes, okay, take me to CVS. I need pens and a legal pad. Because she was going to be taking notes. And she wanted a binder and she wanted a legal pad. And so we did. But yeah, they did and then they did an MRI and they looked at the right breast and then they wanted to look at the left breast and they completely jumped over the breastbone in between, which was riddled with metastatic lesions, just because they weren't looking for them. So fortunately, we got a second opinion at Sloan Kettering and had gotten in with the chief of breast surgery. And the question in our mind going in was, okay, we're going to meet with the surgeon. It's going to be, okay, 1 boob or 2. That was, what are we going to take off? So the surgeon walks in and goes, hi, I'm Dr. Mora. It's so nice to meet you. You don't really need to see me yet. You're going to be talking to my medical oncologist counterpart, but I just wanted to say hi. And leaves. And we're like, wait, what? And then we get pulled into the office of her oncologist, who goes, okay, I just, we're sure, yeah, we'll talk about surgery possibly, but what we're really more worried about is the lesion on the breastbone. And we go, the what on the where now? And she goes, the lesion on your breastbone. And that was when her face kind of went, shit. And that was when she realized that, of course, it's a second opinion, so they don't look at the case file from before. So she had no idea that we had no idea. So she kind of did okay, let's back up. You're stage 4, not stage 2. And that's when, the ringing in the ears starts and everything kind of spins for a few minutes. And then we got to work. We I think we gave ourselves about a day to kind of wallow. And then it was, let's start researching, let's start, looking up good recipes, cancer, chemo soups, and started reading all the studies that I could, and went down a pretty deep research spiral. But I think for us, the hardest part was when we got the initial diagnosis and they said, okay, they didn't even think we needed surgery. They were like, yeah, we'll do a round of chemo, probably no radiation, and wait 5 years and you'll be able to have another baby. Because we were at that point trying for a second kid. And Emily's first question when they said stage 4 was, am I going to be able to have another baby? And the doctor was like, no, never. And that was when Emily lost it. Because that was, I think, the first kind of real grief that we experienced due to the diagnosis. Like that was the first loss. More so than the prospect of losing her breasts, which she was like, I've never really loved them anyway. Losing her fertility was the big blow. The loss of giving Felix a sibling, which we really wanted to do, the loss of giving ourselves another child, just the loss of that future really was, I think, the big thing that hit us so hard with the initial metastatic diagnosis.
After that first appointment, you talked about the wallowing for a day and then getting to work, and that just is quintessential Emily. But is that your way of coping as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that was aligned.
Yeah, very much so. I'm a man of action. I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do about it? Like, it is what it is. We don't have a time machine. It is what it is. What are we going to do about it? Which I think, as much as Emily was like that, I think I'm probably more like that. So I think I sometimes dragged her along in that a little bit, but I think she appreciated it. We took our turns with, okay, I'm gonna have my sad day today, and the other one is gonna be sitting here going, yeah, get up off the mat. But in general, I think we were both pretty much like, what's next,
And that served you both well in terms of getting to the next medication and getting to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, would you talk about the experience of Anya finding out that she was metastatic, and maybe also just mention how long between the early stage diagnosis and the metastatic diagnosis?
So Anya was diagnosed with inflammatory breast cancer. It was supposed to kill her within, I think the average life expectancy was about 2 years or so at the time she was diagnosed. But this was previous to the development of all sorts of things like Herceptin that could extend life for people with inflammatory breast cancer. And so the sort of reality back then was that if you can live 5 years with inflammatory breast cancer, you're in the clear. And she had lived for 5 years with inflammatory breast cancer on her septum. And so, I mean, we always felt like we were kind of walking on the thinnest veneer of ice, and that any day we could sort of be swallowed up. But there was some sense that maybe she had managed to slip away from inflammatory breast cancer. She started working out at the gym and started feeling something in her sternum, and she thought maybe, she was doing a lot of sit-ups, and she thought maybe she had strained something. And I guess I'll just say this much for spouses watching together. It's a really difficult thing as a spouse to both try to calm your loved one, and then not to live in denial. There were 2 times where I tried to calm Anya, tried to reassure Anya, and I was wrong. And the sternum was one, and the day before she died was another.
Mm.
I always had the sense that I didn't live in denial, but I couldn't live with full recognition. And so I had to live in this contingent world of maybe what if, maybe what if her septum works? Maybe what if she found a way to slow this down? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we were in a practice here in Macon, Georgia, which was notorious for its waiting. And so we were stuck in a waiting room for 2 hours, more than 2 hours, to find out whether she had a recurrence. I remember I was so nervous. I get kind of OCD or something sometimes. Before I acted is when I used to do this, and then before these huge moments. And I remember trying to line up my shoes. There's a board kind of pattern in the way. I was lining up my shoes. I was just absolutely freaking out. Nervous beyond belief. But waiting and waiting and waiting. You'd go from the waiting room to another sub-waiting room to the final, sort of antiseptic room where they hold you. Everything is cold. Your nerves are shot. And finally, we begged the physician's assistant, just tell us what the deal is. And he said, there's a spot on your sternum. And it's hard to describe how to feel, because Anya was also trying to reassure me that, when it's in the bones, it moves slowest. That's not a bad place for it to go. So I don't think I had a sense of what stage 4 was. And I just kept thinking, okay, it's in the bones. We'll just try to contain it there. It's in the sternum. And then the doctor came in and said, maybe this is necrosis from radiation to, yeah, I think that was right. She thought it was necrosis from radiation to the breast area. And so we had this little glimmer of hope there too. I clung to that for a few more days. It feels like you climb to the very top of a tree, and then the branch gives, the next branch gives, the next, and then, by the time you hit the bottom, you've just been dazed and just shaken of your ability to think at some level. So I was sort of stunned and in shock, I think, and I think looking for ways to reassure myself that this didn't mean the end of the line for Anya, that it was just another phase. And I've always thought, since the first time she was diagnosed, when you're given this horrible news, it feels as though you're like a cat or a wild animal that's been stuck down into this dark sack, and you begin to struggle and you try to claw your way out. And then this weird thing happens where all of a sudden you're that same cat, and you've normalized the bag, and you're setting up tea in the bag and doing these weird, you're carrying on normal, And so I think something sort of similar happened there too. But I don't think I fully understood. I don't think I fully understood what stage 4 meant to Anya, and I think that Anya was still looking to the metastatic community for reassurance that bone mets were controllable, and indeed they were for a long time.
Abigail, I think you could add to your queue of episode topics or blog posts the fine line between denial and optimism.
Yeah.
And it is
'Cause it's-
such a fine line. It really is.
Especially as a caregiver, it's a very difficult line to tread.
Well, I'll just add this much. There's a reason why I calmed all the time. It's because, as anybody knows in the metastatic community, for every one time that you have a progression, there are hundreds of times, like literally sometimes hundreds of times, when you think something is wrong. You feel some twinge in your brain and you think, I've got brain cancer, or you feel an ache in your hip and you think it's gone to your hip. And so, after scan, you begin to say, well, chances are this is maybe something that is real, that might come from a side effect from your medications that are likely ruining the body as well. So yeah, it's hard. It's an impossible thing both to calm and to be realistic.
I also love the metaphors of the hitting all the branches on the way down, and the cat in the bag normalizing, because we all normalize this.
We're bag people now.
Yeah, it's
with,
funny.
with a dark sense of humor as well.
That's right.
Jimmy, can we come over to you, talk about that experience of Melissa learning that she was metastatic?
Yeah, well, mine is very unique because, so focusing on the metastatic diagnosis, she was already sort of out of treatment. And because she was so young, the hospital that she was getting treatment at was very adamant that she was too young for cancer. And if you've seen the movie, that's kind of how it played out. Was, somebody told her, oh no, you're too young. She had to wait for scans. One doctor actually said, you're fine, don't worry about it, we're not going to do scans because it's not hospital policy, which annoyed me, but it also, I believed it. So we were in the middle of making a movie, and Melissa had some stomach pains and went in to get a second opinion at Northwestern. And I was actually scouting a location for some scenes we were doing, so I wasn't even there. And she called me crying as I'm walking out the door saying, it's back. And, I personally was furious with the doctors who kept saying, oh, you're fine. And that became kind of our mantra to anybody else going through this, that, you got to be your own self-advocate. Doctors are great. They don't know everything. From that point on, though, it became, what are we going to do next? What's the next treatment? What's the next option? What's the next place to go to make her feel better? But I don't think either of us really were willing to accept that it was terminal, that it was, metastatic, and that there was no real coming back from it. We both had a lot of hope that something would work. Because like you said, you have one scan where things get much worse, and then you have a scan that things get much better. And then you think, who knows, maybe this is the one. This is the treatment that's going to beat the odds. And that really builds up a lot of, at least in my experience, was a lot of anticipatory grief. A lot of feelings of hopelessness and just lack of control. You lose control in these situations, and you just have to you can be as proactive as you want, but cancer doesn't really care how hard you work. It's non-discriminating in the sense that it's just going to keep doing its thing. So for us, it became, let's make lemons out of lemonade, or lemonade out of lemons, and try to make the best of it and just never give up. So I think for us, it's kind of the starting point for figuring out what to do next.
Was fertility a significant issue for Melissa as well?
Well, yeah, neither of us were really sure we wanted to have kids, so it really wasn't a big factor in our relationship. But she had actually had an oophorectomy at one point, so yeah, kids were out of the question pretty early. When she was diagnosed, early stage at 23. Even then, they were like, you're going to have to wait 5 years. And by the time 5 years passed, she was metastatic. So it just kind of was off the table from day one. That's why we have a cat.
And cats are great substitute children. I learned the term secondary infertility throughout my diagnosis, and we already had 2 children when I was diagnosed. But the taking away of just the possibility of another child is almost as bad as being told you'll never have a child, at least as far as I experienced. I know Emily and I talked about that quite a bit. Was that something that Anya struggled with, Andrew? I know she was diagnosed while pregnant initially.
Absolutely. Now, Anya had a really late miscarriage. There were maybe 2 ended pregnancies, one of which was really late, and she frankly felt more trauma at the loss of that late pregnancy. I want to say it like 16 weeks, maybe. It was a very difficult thing. She felt more trauma there than she did at her cancer diagnosis, and the reason was because she was pregnant when she had the cancer diagnosis. But we I think absolutely would have wanted another child. We thought for a little while we were in that little window of remission that maybe we would adopt, and so we tried, and eventually came to the realization and acceptance that we couldn't have another child. But absolutely that was a loss, a huge loss for her.
So many losses with MBC. I want to come back to you, Christian, and talk about this idea of the person that you have always relied on, your best friend, your wife, not being able to lean on her in the same way, and how you dealt with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you ever have been in a caregiver group, support group, it's the common refrain is, yeah, she has cancer. What about me? Because it's, you don't lose your humanity when your partner is diagnosed with breast cancer. You do have to often set it aside for a lot of the time, because it's you're very much not the priority, rightfully so, but and I think all of us gladly put ourselves aside for our partners, but there's definitely a limit to how much any one person can do that and for how long before it starts to wear on you. Personally, I never reached the level of resentment, I wouldn't say, with Emily. Part of it was, when we had Felix, we together decided that she was going to kind of put her career aside temporarily on hold in order to stay home with Felix. She was an attorney, but she was worked as court-appointed guardian, so she was not the kind of attorney that makes a lot of money. So my career earnings potential was higher, and so we said, okay, well, one of us is going to stay home and the other is going to focus on maximizing their career opportunities. And so she had done that for me for the first 2 years of Felix's life. And so, when she was diagnosed, I had some career plans. I was going to, I was in talks with my company for them to send me to an executive MBA kind of program. And that all went out the window, because we just buckled down into survival mode. And so, it very much was, okay, well, you let me do my thing and you kind of sacrificed your own self-interest for that for a while, and it's only reasonable that I do the same. But again, if you're ever in a caregiver group, the common refrain is you have to take care of yourself, because you're no good to anyone if you're burnt out, including your partner, or the rest of your family, your kids, your pets, whatever. And so, I definitely tried to make it a priority to do some things for myself. I had a monthly Dungeons and Dragons game that I played that started when Felix was very young, that I continued to do and prioritize. One Sunday a month, I went down, and it was hard because, I would go to work during the week, and so she would, I'd take him, I would wake up with him so she could sleep in, and then as soon as I got home from work, would take him off her hands, and she could manage the during the day part as long as she had the weekend to, recover. And so I would take him all weekend. So once a month, I was like, okay, I need you to give up that recovery day on the weekend so I can go, pretend I'm a wizard for a few hours and drink beer with my friends. And I won't say that it was always, I won't say that it was never a fight. It definitely caused a lot of strife for me to kind of put my foot down and say, no, this is something that I really need. But it was important. And she, when it wasn't, oh my God, I'm so exhausted, I need you here, in her more lucid moments, she recognized that, and it's like, no, it is important, you do need it. But I would do that. I would say, hey, I'm going to be 40 minutes later coming home from work today because I'm going to stop at the driving range and whack the hell out of some balls for 45 minutes, let out some energy, let off some steam. Yeah, I think it's tremendously important to take that time for yourself, to really recharge your own batteries so that you can continue to be the best partner you can be.
Was there a particular relationship that helped you cope, that helped you recharge those batteries, or was it more of you talked about the physical with the going to the driving range, you talked about the Dungeons and Dragons, which is a whole other focus, but was there a place or a person where you were able to work through these feelings outside of Emily?
Those were my primary things. Yeah, I mean, I did develop some closer friendships with, ironically, some of like our mom friends. Because I became the mom in a lot of, in a very patriarchal kind of mindset. It was on the weekends, it was me at the playground. It was me going to the school meetings and stuff where, for better or worse, it's usually the moms there. So I did feel, unfortunately, I have a tremendous number of really amazing women in our life who very much let me feel like one of the girls in a way. And some very secure husbands who did not mind me texting their wives at all hours of the day, just wanting to chat, which is really great. I feel very, very fortunate for that.
It's great. It's wonderful that you've had that. Andrew, can we come to you and talk about the coping and how you took care of yourself as a caregiver while Anya was living with metastatic breast cancer?
Listening to Christian, I'm mindful that being in a spousal support group would have been really good for me, but I wasn't in it. I was all alone. My best friend was Anya. We shared everything together. I did not diversify my friend crops. You know what I mean? Like I had no support network, none.
Mm.
Anya was my support network. We were each other's best friend. And so it was difficult. I think Anya was an introspective person, though she could be an extrovert when she wanted to, obviously getting up and reading or going and teaching. But she was methodical and disciplined in her poetry. She would sit down for a couple of hours every day. But she could also slip in a half hour or 45 minutes of poetry here or there, you know, grabbing some free time when she could, and I would kind of respect her closed door. She lived with cancer for 14 years and metastatic cancer for 8 years. So this is a lot of our life now. My own creativity, I've learned, is collaborative, and it relies oftentimes on other people's schedules. And I couldn't just sort of steal a moment here or there, just like with Christian's Dungeons and Dragons, you know, it's dependent upon other people. So I remember at one point I was doing work with anti-trafficking, and Anya was in remission. She said, you know, if I come out of remission, I was going around giving talks around town. If I come out of remission, you're going to be awfully sorry, you know. And so I quit, you know, I stopped doing that. And instead, I was like, I'll find something really close to home. I got involved in park restoration. We live right on a park. And I felt this huge satisfaction planting a tree. It was therapy to me, to be able to see life growing in the midst of this fear that I had. I needed that. I needed that for my own sanity. But what would inevitably happen is these collaborative processes, which in my mind wouldn't take that much time. It's right in front of the house. You know, you can always call me back. Inevitably, things are way more complex because they're collaborative. Getting anything done in a city like Macon takes time, and you're on the phone and interrupting, and it's really difficult. And I think there were times where those projects, even though they were right in front of my house, drew me away. I remember thinking after Anya died that if I could, I would axe every goddamn tree in the park if I could spend 5 more minutes with her. You know, we planted 350 trees out there, and I was fuming with myself for spending that time. But that time kept me sane, and then the other thing that kept me sane is writing music. That's probably where my therapy was. I wrote so many songs about what I was going through or what other people were going through. And then I would sing them with my band, and the band is also collaborative. We tried to meet twice a week. We'd usually meet once a week, but those would go for like 3 hours, where Anya would be on her own for 3 hours every week. And she was understanding, but I think he also made me understand that you know, that was difficult. And so I don't know. I think as a spouse that was the most difficult balancing act that you know, Christian talked about, leading to some fights. Anya wasn't like the fighting type, but I know that was difficult, and it's one of the few things I really regret. And I don't know how I would do it. I think I would set clearer boundaries, but it's hard. It's hard when your life is getting sucked into these emergencies, these urgent things that are happening here or there. So yeah, if I had to do it again, I would I think try to choose a little bit more wisely there.
I wonder too, though, if we're talking about the 2.5 years that Emily lived with MBC versus 8 with MBC, 14 with cancer, that it's different over time. As time goes on, it's a little bit easier to take your eyes off what is an emergency, because it was almost like you're getting back to a real life. Does that resonate with you, that it was the time that may have pulled you away a little bit more?
That's absolutely the case. You know, I don't think I got to the space where my parents or her mom was, or her sister, who loved her dearly. She loved them, but there's a moment when everybody's going to fail in 14 years of living with illness. And I think for our relatives, there was a denial, like taking for granted the next month, the next year. I would live in 3-month little pockets, like from scan to scan. And so I'd say to myself, okay, well, if this scan was stable or whatever it was, I'm going to try to live my life until the next one. And then I'll sort of know when things are turning downward. And then, I didn't take for granted, but I tried to live in those little pockets, I think. And so to some extent, and after 14 years, I thought maybe she was the unicorn, maybe she was the exception, that this was moving slowly enough that it would be, if you graphed it, it was just a real slow thing. And I always knew it could become a forest fire at any moment. It could be something out of control. But I thought that I'd have a scan to give me a heads up. And so but the other thing to realize is that Anya was incredibly productive. I'm watching her. She was methodical and disciplined, and she put in her work, and she's doing what she has always dreamed of doing, which is writing book after book after book. And I want to try to be successful in those areas of art that I want to be successful in too. And so it's if anything, her incredible poetry career just sort of urged me on to try and keep writing plays or keep writing music or keep crafting, because when you craft this disorder, as she herself would say, it helps you cope with that disorder in your life, cope with that chaos in your life. So all of this was trying to shape the enormous disorder and chaos and fear and anxiety that's sort of sweeping over our lives. And, I had seen this before. February 7th, 5 days after the anniversary of my mom's death of metastatic breast cancer when I was 15 years old. And so I had lived through this, and I had learned back then how to cope, and how I coped was through art and through creating. And so it was impossible for me to respond in any other way in some respects. And yet I still regret it. Like I still think I didn't set clear enough boundaries. Yeah, I don't want to wiggle away from that.
But also 2020, right? You have hindsight is 2020. Yeah. Not to make too much of the light of last year and the dumpster fire last year was, but it's always easy to look back and say, I could have been perfect in this particular situation.
I found myself trapped. That's all. I found myself trapped. We go in to record a studio album, and unbeknownst to me, the person would have me wait around to play my guitar part on her song for like an entire night. And she didn't know. It was fun for her. But for me, I'm aware that there's somebody at home who doesn't have this time. It really pissed me off. And by the way, it also ruined relationships briefly in that band. One of my best friends, my best friend other than Anya, was a woman named Charlie Thomas. And, it caused all sorts of shortness of mind with her over the years, and she was very patient and very gracious about receiving some of that sort of pent up anxiety about not being at home where I needed to be. Sorry, this is a good. I will owe you after this therapy session, and I thank you very much. I still have not all of this, and I probably should. Apparently, well, no, I went 2 or 3 times there.
I really liked what you talked about in terms of nature too, and just the connection with nature and nurturing something that is going to live beyond you, that there are those other outlets that people might not think of, and nature potentially could be something that would be helpful for some as well. Yeah. But thank you for sharing that. Jimmy, can we come to you in terms of how you coped? How did you take care of yourself, and where did you put what you couldn't do, or when you couldn't lean on? Melissa, sorry, getting a little tongue-tied here.
Well, I think that was actually one of the interesting things that I'd say I wish I had figured out earlier, was that as much as Melissa was going through, she always wanted to be supportive of me as well. She always wanted to hear what was going on, what was bothering me, what was wrong. And I personally didn't want to talk to her about it. I felt like, you have stuff going on. This isn't your problem. I'll deal with it. And I think that, for me, at least in my experience, was the wrong way to handle it. I think talking to her and letting her know where I was coming from really helped with a lot of, silly arguments, things like at times Melissa would feel like, she said like she felt like she was ruining my life because of everything that we had to go through. And I told her it wasn't you, it was cancer. Cancer fucking sucks. And it ruined not just my life, it ruined both our lives in certain contexts.
Sure.
So I think, being willing to just talk to her and lean on her a little bit was something that I think I wish I had picked up on sooner. Also, me and Melissa spent a large amount of time together. We went back for graduate degrees during her treatment. We made a movie. We actually started business together, so we worked from home together. So we were kind of always together. And eventually I tried to find an outlet. And for me, writing and filmmaking was always an outlet, but to kind of have my own space, I did eventually go to therapy, which I think is something I've been encouraging other people in my situation to go do is find a therapist and don't, the first therapist I saw was really weird. These like breathing exercises and these, I don't know, there was a lot of counting involved. And I remember there was Play-Doh at one point and I just didn't understand. It just wasn't me. And then I finally found a therapist who really I clicked with, and I still see her today every 2 weeks or so. And it really helped me a lot. But, me and Melissa kind of clicked and connected because we had a shared dream. We both wanted to be filmmakers. Something, we had spent our lives being told that, you can't make it in the film industry. You're going to be a starving artist, get a real degree or something like that. And we both had a bit of a chip on our shoulder to prove everyone wrong. And I think that motivated both of us, cancer be damned, like we were going to make it happen. And so working together collaboratively really helped a lot. And forgetting some space, we were both constantly traveling for things like, clinical trials or second opinion. And we tried to make kind of an adventure out of it. If we were going to, I remember one of the last ones we did, we went to Florida for in Fort Lauderdale area, and we rented a really sick Airbnb with a swimming pool and a hot tub, and we lived it up while we were there, and we made it into a vacation in between treatments and stuff. So I think making the best of the kind of crappy situation was what really worked well for us. Beyond that, just being okay with not being okay. Cancer, like I said, it sucks, and it's just going to kind of keep sucking. And it took a lot of time to sort of be able to process that and just live with it, if that makes sense. Also kind of letting Melissa tell me when she was too tired or too, ready to go. I remember even even days where she had chemo, for example, we would make it into kind of an adventure. She usually felt bad the next day, so we would go and find a new restaurant to try every chemo appointment. And then the next day, we generally just kind of hang out at the house, and she'd watch TV and I'd work. So it was, she was able to support me as much as I was able to support her, and I wish I had let her earlier on.
I think what I'm also hearing from you, Jimmy, as you're talking, is not making your relationship all about cancer and not letting cancer control everything about your relationship, but also having real life being part of that and treating each other as human beings and like you are in your relationship versus just making it all about cancer. But Jimmy, did you and Melissa ever have the conversation that NBC, I know you used the word ruin, that she was concerned that it ruined your life, but did you ever feel like NBC ruined your relationship or had such a negative effect on your marriage, just by it being part of everything?
It certainly added a whole a whole lot more stress and anxiety to everything. I mean, everything kind of, it compressed timelines, like even simple things like, oh yeah, let's go on vacation. Well, we have to go tomorrow because there might not be a day after that, And so it became a lot of, we got to do everything right now. We got to live a lifetime worth of experiences in the next 6 months because who knows what's after that. And I think that brought in incredible levels of tension and stress, whether we could afford it or whether, she was healthy, feeling up to going, I mean, cancer treatment's not cheap. and if when you start at 23 years old doing cancer treatment and then you're just starting out with new jobs, it's kind of hard to, move on from, a lot of people say, oh, well, it's only money. It's like, yeah, it's only money until you don't have it. So it's something that definitely built in a lot of stress, but also allowed us to get past some of the smaller things that I think some couples might struggle with, whatever that may be. We, no matter how difficult the challenge might be, we always could say, well, it's not cancer, so can't be that big of a deal.
Can I just say,
it gives you a different perspective is what I'm hearing you say. But yes, go ahead, Andrew.
I just want to, this resonates so much with me. And if I could, one of the other things if I could go back, I would say meet with a goddamn money manager, or because we were financial idiots when we were going through this, both of us. And we were $30,000 in debt because Anya wanted to go to Switzerland because every year was the last year. And so we'd want all these sort of big vacations. And eventually I started getting scared that, I've got a child to take care of, and $30,000 in debt was growing. And I think if I had known that, you get $1,000 for a child from Social Security per month, if I would have known that I had a 329 Anya's 501c3, whatever it's called. What am I talking about? The a retirement account. Apparently, I'm so much of a financial idiot I can't even name these things right now. There were sources. I had thought that she didn't have any life insurance, but the life insurance offered from the school was enough. Was more than I thought. I thought it was just going to be enough to cover funeral expenses. I would have absolutely, if I had known that stuff, I would not. I would have been like, yeah, let's just go out and spend money a bit more. I wasn't like tight-fisted. We went all over the place, but that very last year, I suggested, because of Noah being too old to behave himself on vacation, that we can't go to Switzerland this particular year. And anyway, I really regret that too. Lots of stuff.
Yeah, we did something similar where we, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We,
talking too much.
We saved up a bunch of money for, what was going to be one last big trip where we were going to go all over Europe. And unfortunately, 2020 hit, and then that was off the table. So it became kind of this thing where I wish we didn't wait, but I also had this fear of, how I have a fear mostly that not so much the future as much as if Melissa needed a clinical trial that for some reason wasn't covered by insurance, how is I going to pay it? And every day I woke up freaking out about how I was going to pay to make sure my wife stayed alive. Yeah. And, that's not a great way to live life, And so I think yes, a money manager looking into options and like what is out there is something that definitely.
But the reason you don't want to do it is because you have to say, what happens when my wife dies?
Yeah.
I don't want to have that conversation because I don't want to, because it's like naming the thing that you fear the most.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Talk about a great segue, Andrew.
That's true. So what we want to talk about next is the transition and the end of each of your wives' lives. What you felt went well, what you might have done differently. And Christian, I want to start start with you on that one, or if you want to talk about anything else that would have made kind of that living with, if any of these other things resonate with you as well. If you want to chime in, that would be fine. Or if you want to just go ahead and move on. I know Emily had lots of instructions.
Yeah, well, you know, as I said, Emily did dying for a living in a way, which I think that's the first time I've said it that way. That's catchy. But yeah, so I am very fortunate that she thought about that a lot. I have a very close dear friend who is now a dear friend who was also stage 4. Emily knew his wife through her support group at MSK. She ended up dying 2 months after Emily did, and her husband and I have become close since then. But you know, she refused to talk about it, refused to think about it, refused to do any planning, estate-wise, you know, money-wise, directive-wise, healthcare proxy, power of attorney, any of that stuff. Just was like, nope, I'm not going to die. Which I totally get. But I will say it made his life so much harder when she died. Caused so much more work for him. And I am so eternally grateful for all of the work and all of the effort that Emily put in to it before she died, to make things as absolutely easy as she could for me. So anyone who's listening who has been struggling with the idea of having those conversations, it's honestly the biggest gift of love that you can give your partner is to get your will done, write down what it is you want for your funeral, write down if there are special things that you want certain people to have, write it down. If there's someone, like Emily bought cards, greeting cards. She loved sending greeting cards to friends. And after she died, I discovered an entire box of cards that she had bought ahead of time and labeled for Margaret's birthday, for Mom at Christmas, and it's like a year's worth of cards that she would have sent, that I've been filling out and sending on her behalf because she would have wanted it. And I'm thrilled to be able to do that. And as are the recipients, of course. You know, there are things that she knew to do that you may not know to do. Abigail, you and I have talked many times about setting up something that lays all these things out, but like, she had all of her bank accounts that weren't already joint accounts set up with me as, you know, payable on death. So all I had to do was go to the bank and say, she died, here's the death certificate. And they go, okay. And they shoved all the money over to me. Didn't have to go through probate, didn't have to go through the will and the estate. I literally didn't have to even file any sort of estate forms for anything because everything was set up so that it would just automatically go to me. It avoided any court stuff, any legal stuff. And I'm sitting here expecting to have to do a lot more than I did and was so, so grateful for it. Other things that she did, you know, we talked about my life after she was gone. What that would look like, you know, that, you know, she made it very clear she wanted me to, if I was interested in it, she wanted me to find love again. She wanted Felix to have a mom in his life again. Her one stipulation was that the next wife couldn't have a bigger ring than she did, but but you know, that's only fair. But it was something that was incredibly difficult, incredibly painful to talk about, but has made my life since her death so much more comfortable, because I don't worry about what would Emily have wanted. What would she have wanted me to do? How would she have wanted me to act? I know, because she told me, and she even wrote it down. She wrote me letters. She created an email address for me that before she died, she sent emails to. She sent poems that she'd written, letters, jokes, limericks, for me, and an account for Felix as well. She didn't do nearly as much as she planned to do. It was hard for her to do it, but she did send about a dozen things to it, which I treasure. Now, she didn't she didn't write down. She told me that email existed, but she did not write down what the email was or what its password was. And she was literally on her deathbed, non-responsive, and I'm sitting here shaking her, panicking, like, you got to tell me what the email address is. And she goes, no, don't worry about it. I'll tell you later when I'm feeling better. And I'm like, you're dying. You're not feeling better. Which caused a tremendous amount of panic and stress in her last days until she actually died. And I was like, well, I have her email password. I'll just go and look at her sent folder and find it and send a password request to her email. And like, I'm a smart guy. I'll figure it out. Like, I didn't need to panic about it nearly as much as I did. But if she had, she did so much, but like, if she had been like, yeah, I wrote it in an envelope, it's somewhere in my desk, I would just be like, okay. And I would have been able to calm down. So even that one little thing that she didn't do caused me so much panic. Like, I can't imagine if she hadn't done all of the amazing things that she did do, that I did know that she did, how much harder life would have been in the wake of her death. So absolutely, please have those conversations. Talk about where and how you want to die. She did not want to die in the hospital. She said, I want to be home. I want to be in the big bed. I brought the big bed downstairs because she couldn't go upstairs anymore. So I spent a day collapsing the big king bed and dragging it all downstairs and reassembling it, because she wanted to be in her bed with the cats and me and Felix. And that's what she got. Not everyone is fortunate enough to be able to have the death that they hoped for if you made those plans, but luckily she did, and we were able to honor her wishes because we knew what they were. So, very difficult, but it's worth the pain. It's worth the pain you put in early so that you don't have to deal with it when you have so much more pain already in those moments.
Such a wise statement to deal with things that are hard when you're not in the midst of chaos, or you're not in the midst of something really hard. That's actually been a theme among all of the webinars that we've had in terms of planning ahead, visualizing, thinking about things when you're not in a crisis mode, that you're just able to think through things in a different way, clearer way, and not have to panic or not have to make quick decisions when your mind is clouded with so many other things. Andrew, would you talk about how things went for Anya towards the end, and what went well, what didn't go well?
Well, I'm just gonna second everything Christian said. Anya also wrote down funeral arrangements and things that she wanted. She also had, and this is sort of typical Anya, like 10 people who she said should absolutely not be let into her hospital room, at any, and then she had people who, do not let these people speak at my funeral. Those people have no idea either. This is how sly it can be about things that made her angry. But those things were really helpful. Definitely financial idiot again. Anya has gotten a Guggenheim Award, and had just deposited money in an account. And when she went down there, she inquired about me, and they said, "Oh, just bring him back in the next week and have him co-sign." And she died, and then I had to go through probate and give a bunch of lawyers her money, and that hurt. And I'll just say this much too, that Hannah Arendt talks about the banality of evil. Well, there's a banality of grief. I'm shocked at it. I was shocked that for people in acute emotional distress and being thrown back in the worst possible way, that you suddenly have to administer all of these different things coming at you incredibly quickly, and that was a little bit unexpected too. I'm not in my right mind. Thankfully, this is a piece of advice. We had somebody who was good with money, who was a good friend of mine and Anya's, and she just stepped up and organized all my finances for me. She just helped me when I was in most need of help, and that was so helpful and wonderful. So I'm hesitant to talk about this, Abigail, because it's the nightmare. It's the nightmare situation. It's the nightmare scenario. Anya always worried about this. When you have metastatic breast cancer, you think you can live from, maybe you could live in these 3-month pockets from stable scan. She had just had her best scan 3 months before that she had in on this drug. And that Monday, we were supposed to go in and get a whole slew of tests, get another scan. And every time, this, everybody in the metastatic community knows this, you have scanxiety. Whatever phantom or real symptoms in your body, you're going to feel them most acutely the day before you come in to get a scan. And so she started feeling shortness of breath. She had a acute shortness of breath when she had gotten the Guggenheim a few months earlier, came back right before the scan, and it was a great scan. Oftentimes, scans don't correspond to symptoms. So she had shortness of breath out on a 100-degree day. This inconsiderate band leader made all the parents stand around. Another guy had a mild heart attack out there that day too. She was close to fainting. We, got her to get some cold. The next day, we were laughing and idiocracy. And I think, Anya was so used to kind of driving some of these fears inside that, there was just some confusion, I guess. But even that last day wasn't terribly unusual. And then on that was a Saturday. So this is the weekend, and we have to figure out, do we go down to the emergency room at a sub-rate hospital here in Macon on Saturday night when it looks like total chaos down there, and when you're already immunosuppressed, how do you deal with this? What's going on a Saturday night? You're going to wait for hours down there. Is this going to be worse than actually what you're dealing with? If she gets a respiratory cold with lung meds, that could hurt her. We're living in the midst of COVID. I can't imagine what that's like right now for the metastatic community, because we were paranoid about the flu. And so we went to a little doc in the box here, a little urgent care clinic on Sunday. He said, "Oh, this is pneumonia. I see it on the x-rays. It's in 3 lobes. It's no big deal. Just take this antibiotic. It'll be fine. If something happens, go down to the hospital. You could take an antibiotic there that's even more, pervasive and strong, and that'll take care of it. No problem." And he misdiagnosed her. He just misdiagnosed her. She was having a pericardial effusion. We were always on the lookout for pleural effusions. That was the fear. Now, she had known about pericardial effusions. I had no idea what a pericardial effusion was. We were like, is there a pleural effusion there? No, there's no pleural effusion. So we went to the hospital. We walked in the hospital arm in arm together at 8 p.m. And she was in the emergency room. They still didn't really diagnose her well in the emergency room. They dismissed us to her normal hospital room. And it was only at midnight when we couldn't get a read on her blood pressure and her temperature, because her temperature was so low that all of a sudden the room was flooded with people from ICU. And suddenly, I had been prepared preparing just to spend a couple of days there, possibility of a bad scan, but I don't know. And then all of a sudden, it's life or death if we don't take her down to ICU, and she might not even make it there. And by the way, they still didn't know it was a pericardial effusion. They had no idea what it was. It was a night shift down at Macon's hospital. They threw everything at it. And finally, in the morning shift, woman came in. She's in ICU. They said, wait out here. She'll stabilize in 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll bring you in. So I'm not allowed in there with her. And so I wasn't with her. I begged to be in there with her. At one point, they let me in here for a little while. It was a terrible scene. I had to decide in very little time whether to intubate her. And now we know the horrors of intubation because we are living in the COVID world. I had no idea what that meant. I knew that the nurse told me that if she's not intubated, she'd die. And I knew that I wanted to keep her alive. And when I found out what intubation was, I think I feel such regret. I felt such regret for that after she died. At the time, I thought she had pneumonia and that we could keep her alive, stabilize her with antibiotics. And then afterwards, Dr. Dyson over there at Johns Hopkins said that I did exactly the right thing. Even with pericardial effusion, you can often keep people alive for months and months. Still, it was a terrible thing. I remember the first time, I'd never gotten communion. I grew up Jewish. Anya was Episcopalian, grew up Russian Orthodox. And I went in there, and for the first time I took communion. And I think the reason I did that was to get in touch with her suffering. And I just imagined that the communion was the intubation. So that was incredibly difficult. Having that happen, I think bizarrely, Anya would have chosen that quick death that Noah didn't have to witness, even over what Emily had to deal with. Having such time, Emily was like near death's door for months, it seemed to me. You never knew when she went into the doctors. She would go into the hospital. You wouldn't know if she'd come out again. I didn't think she'd come out again. Maybe twice in the hospital. Anya didn't want that. She would have wanted to go quickly, but not in that way, not trying to be resuscitated. So yeah, that was just insanely difficult, and I'm so sorry to have to talk about that in front of anybody with metastatic breast cancer, because it's the nightmare. Sorry.
But a good reminder that we have no idea what could happen. And that could happen to any one of us. And it just underscores the importance of talking about what would someone want in all of those different scenarios. And you knew what Anya didn't want. Again, and it's important to have those conversations, as difficult and as hard as they are, so that in that moment, you're not having to think through what would this person want. They already talked to you about it. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing that, because I think it's important for everybody to know what could potentially happen, as hard as it is to think about that. Jimmy, would you like to talk about Melissa and what happened towards the end for her? It was in June, right, that she passed away?
June 21st. Yeah, she wasn't really one to plan all of what was going on. So, I mean, it was one of those things where I almost had to kind of read between the lines of things she would say, especially, once she passed, we were in the middle of writing a follow-up film to our movie Ginger, and a lot of that kind of went through the process of the loss and funeral planning. And I feel like during that, I got some idea of what she wanted, but she never really wanted to. One, I don't think she knew exactly what she wanted, which was okay. But it was also that it wasn't a conversation that either of us were willing to have. And I'm glad that I paid enough attention to kind of get an idea of what she wanted. A lot of the stuff actually we haven't even been able to do yet because COVID has restricted so much that we had a small funeral service, but that was about it. So we're kind of holding off. I have her ashes over here, actually. But even beyond the planning of all that, I think Melissa was put into hospice for the last, I'd say, I think it was about 2 weeks that she was in hospice. And I don't think either of us really accepted what hospice meant. That it was more about palliative care and keeping her comfortable, and that there really wasn't much left they can do. And for us, we kept looking for more treatments. We just didn't kind of take that as preparing for the end. And I wish we had done a little bit more, especially with the hospice, because I have images in my mind that will stay with me forever about the day Melissa the day she passed. She ended up in a lot of pain, and the hospice people were supposed to send over some pain medication and anxiety medication to help, and it took something like 5 hours for them to deliver the medicine. And I just remember kind of losing it a little bit at the palliative care nurse who was here, who, I get it, things happen, but when something like that is going on, the fact that one pharmacist didn't sign off on it, so they didn't go out with the delivery, just drove me nuts. And I just wish that we had spent 2-3 days earlier getting the drugs ready, they brought over a ventilator, an oxygen tank for her, which, again, this all happened the day of. So it was kind of like this mad scramble. And, one of Melissa's wishes was to have immediate family and friends here. And so her mom was here, her sister, her brother-in-law, and a couple of very close cousins were here. And I couldn't really function. I'm really glad that they were all there, because especially my brother-in-law, Dan, he was able to kind of step up and take some of the reins of handling everything that was going on, while me and Melissa's sister were both kind of just lost in grief. And sorry, I'm going off a little bit on a tangent, but
that's okay.
I think a little bit more planning would have been better for me personally. But it was the most difficult moment of my life. So it's hard to really say what worked and what didn't work when really at the end of the day, everything sucked anyway. So, I think, and also, a big thing for me was having people to fall back on. I mentioned Dan, but also a good friend, another Melissa in my life. She helped with all of the funeral planning, from, prayer cards and to, we had to do these weird things with, I think they can only have like 20 people in the building because of COVID. So we had to have a rotating thing. And I was like, I've done a lot of event planning in my life, but this is not the kind of event planning I ever want to do. So having and relying on people around me really was, I can't begin to thank those people enough for everything they did.
Jimmy, I think you made such a great point about how you were taking your cues from Melissa. And as much as we're talking about what went well, what didn't go well, etc., at the end of the day, taking your cues from the person who is going through it is so important. As much as maybe having these conversations could make things a bit better, it is still the person who is dying, and it's their wishes. And if they don't want to plan, and if they don't want to talk about it, then honoring what that is love, right? That is showing love to your spouse or to your friend or whoever it is, that following their lead on that. But thank you for sharing that. And for anybody who's listening and watching who asks, what can I do? Because so many people do ask, what can I do? It sounds like you've given some really key things, that doing some of those, what Andrew was saying, the banality, the arrangements, the running around, the picking up this or picking up that, having somebody to rely on to do that, so that the person who is the closest to the person who has died doesn't have to deal with those things. What a gift! What a gift that is. So we are half an hour more than we usually go. And I know Christian is going to have to jump off here in just a minute, but what I'd really love to do just quickly is to go around and talk about what each of you are doing to carry on your wife's legacy. And Christian, since I know you've got to jump off, do you have maybe a minute or two to talk about metastatic parenthood? Are we going to get to see Felix here for a minute?
Felix!
Hey, Felix! Malcolm wants you to know that he has decided Spider-Man is the best ever. And he totally agrees with you that Spider-Man is the best. Andrew, would you go ahead, Christian? Sorry.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I'm doing is this. Emily was all about conversations, and with her podcast, with the play, with her blog, she really wanted to have and amplify these really important conversations. And so I feel my biggest contribution right now is continuing to participate in them in her stead. Yes, just a few minutes. Yes, Metastatic Parenthood Project is something that I'm hoping to get going eventually. Life has been a thing recently, so we haven't really made any progress on that front. But I'm trying to stay engaged in the community and just continue to share her story and my experience to help others through this crazy process as best I can.
Well, let me just say the fact that you have been grieving openly and talking about your grief, Christian, and talking about the reminders, the things that come up on, your Facebook timeline, or the firsts, because there's all these firsts. The first time you celebrate whatever it is without your spouse, talking about those things, I think has been a huge gift to everybody. Not only is it keeping Emily alive and in our thoughts, but you're modeling how hard it is. And when I think you made a comment on that podcast that we did about how all of the people in the grief groups talk about it's good to talk about the person who's died and to say their name, because the people who have lost that person are thinking about them all the time. So it's not like it's bringing it all back up because it's already there. Right. So I think that was a huge, just very practical thing. Is there anything else that you'd like to add in terms of what's been helpful for you in the aftermath of Emily's death?
No, I will say one thing that I told a lot of people in the immediate aftermath of Emily's death, what can I do? What can I do? And I think the other two gentlemen here could probably sympathize with this. Eventually, you're like, I can't take any more help right now. I'm just flooded with well-wishers. And so eventually I started to tell people the best thing you can do is set an alert on your phone for 6 months from now, 9 months from now, a year from now, and ask me then. Because right now I have more help than I can possibly accept, but I know that's gonna end. And I have had a couple people who have reached out recently who it was you told me back then to reach out now, so I am, which was just meant the absolute world to me. So I would say, even if someone doesn't ask you to do that, do that. Set an alarm, 6 months from now, and just say, check in. Because even if they don't need anything, the idea that someone is still thinking of you and thinking of your partner who's gone really makes all the difference.
Such a wise thing to say. It's just like getting diagnosed, right? Everybody comes right in and wants to do a meal train and wants to do all of those things. And then as you continue to live with this, you kind of fall off of people's radar. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
He's gonna tear down the walls if I don't feed him. So I am gonna have to sign off real quick, but it was so nice meeting you, and please continue.
Thank you,
I'm
Christian,
happy to
for your
join any
time.
other time. Thank you so much.
Andrew, can we come over to you? Maybe I'd love to hear you talk about the play a little bit. And then I know you're a little bit farther along in this grief journey from Christian and Jimmy. And tell us how you're doing and how that's going.
Well, I'll just say that I had a very different experience than Christian. I was shocked that family disappeared. I was shocked that people were more comfortable dropping off stuff at the house than they were actually talking to me. And I understand, as somebody whose spouse was their best friend, Anya was the person that I would have grieved to. And so the person that I would have grieved to and opened up to was gone. And it was impossible for me to expect other people to show up in the way that Anya would have. But I remember 10 p.m. would come, Noah would go to sleep, and then I would have these hours that I would have spent with Anya, and there was nobody. Nobody's going to call me up the phone every single night. Nobody called me up the phone really every week. I was shocked that family members who loved me didn't have me on their mind all the time. I was shocked that sometimes colleagues would be short with me. I had one colleague threaten not to be friends with me. She would not be my friend if, I was impatient or whatever it was that I was experiencing. I could not believe it. I haven't spoken to her to this day. Friends came in absolutely unexpected ways. So what helped me out in those days, it wasn't people, because there was nobody. Even my closest friends weren't going to call me every single night. The people who were there for me weren't going to call me every single night and talk to me. And I wouldn't want to talk to them anyway, because I wanted to talk to Anya, right? That's the reality of it. So I discovered when I got back, I knew Anya was working on a manuscript. She was supposed to show it to me the next week. I saw that manuscript open on her computer, which was still on when I came back home, read that manuscript for the first time. But then I went through her folders, and I figured she had some poems that she didn't publish that were part of her journaling process, poems that she never sent out for publication or whatnot. But I didn't expect to find what I found, which was, I just went back as far as her metastatic diagnosis, and she had written 500 poems that she didn't publish, and they were amazing poems. And I would, there was humor in there, and there was grief in there, and I was with her when I was reading those poems and editing her manuscript, and so that kept me with her. That manuscript, Saint Agnostica, I have to fill out the LSU marketing stuff for it, which I hate doing, selling things in compressed ways, as you know, Abigail. But that's been really helpful. The people who were there for me were the metastatic community. That was my therapy. I didn't go to therapy when I should have gone to therapy, but I knew that the metastatic breast cancer community had been there for Anya. I knew that they had given them, even somebody who was as close to her as a human being could be, I knew that they were behind the same door with her. And I felt such gratitude for their seeing Anya through every day. When I was soundly sleeping and she was awake on some crazy medication, and 3 a.m. in the morning, all these people coming to hold her. And so I wanted to give something back to the metastatic breast cancer community. I started interviewing people for this documentary theater piece. What I didn't know was how helpful they were going to be to me. Like they say, I think that they saved Anya's life in so many ways, and I think they saved my life in so many ways too. They caught Anya when she was falling, and they caught me when I was falling. And so this documentary theater play that I've been working on is just the best I can do to say thank you to this community that is so strong together, even in their most vulnerable and fearful and anxious times, with these relationships that they've had that are deep as any marriage in a lot of ways. And so that was incredibly helpful to me. And then just continuing I couldn't sing songs for a number of days after she died. Music failed me. But then it came back, and I sung my way through and wrote songs about grief and how difficult that was. And that got me able to, it did what Anya's poetry did for her. It allows you to gain a little bit of distance from your grief, even while not leaving your grief at all. You're shaping your grief, you're shaping it, you're expressing it, but you're getting just a little bit of distance from it at the same time. Same thing through writing. I posted every day about Anya. I posted on her Instagram page, and I was very honest with what I was going through, to the point where I wanted to do it for a year, post every day about Anya. And I went through that, and I think people started worrying for my sanity. So I had to slow that down a little bit. But those were the things that got me through: writing, music, and then talking with people in the metastatic breast cancer community.
The play For Our Lives is a representation of so many different people's experiences. And, small spoiler alert, we're going to be taping some of it soon. So everyone will get to experience some of that as well. So thank you, Andrew, for sharing. Jimmy, I know you have got a foundation and all kinds of wonderful things going on. Will you talk about how you're personally doing, and also what you're doing to carry on Melissa's legacy?
Sure. So personally, I think I needed space after a while. I think similar to what he was saying earlier about, it was for me kind of a mad rush of people trying to, deliver food or well wishes or ask what they can do when unfortunately there really was nothing to do. And I think also for me, it almost became exhausting in the sense that I felt this need to put on a happy face and let everyone know, like, I'm doing okay. I'm not gonna do anything crazy. Just calm down. And after a while, that kind of built up, and I just needed some alone time to process and to grieve. And so I took that, and part of that process for me was screenwriting. Before Melissa passed, we obviously made Ginger, and that led to us starting a foundation, which I wanted to name after her, but she wanted both our names on it because that's who she was. So the Melissa and Jimmy Borton Foundation, and it's a 501c3 that's going to be making documentaries and hopefully use things like actors to go to children's hospitals in character and make additional films. We're working on Live Slow Die Whenever, which is a follow-up to Ginger, and Melissa and I co-wrote that and got into a pretty rough draft before she passed, and I've kind of taken it on from there. And it's difficult because she was definitely the writer in the group. I personally don't think I'm the best writer in the world, but I think the hardest part for that whole process is just I bounced every idea I ever had off of Melissa. Every creative idea, and she was pretty okay with telling me when my ideas were stupid. Now I don't really have that. I can reach out to friends or colleagues and be like, yeah, what do you think about this? But they're gonna have kid gloves on to an extent because of the nature of the film and it being about Melissa in a lot of ways. So I think for us, for me right now, I'm just trying to just get life back in order, and then take those steps towards being creative and being productive again, and kind of finding that that passion for the arts that I had for so long, that I wouldn't say went away. It just became less of a priority. So that's sort of where I'm at the moment.
And I guess this question is for both of you too, since you did so closely collaborate with your wives. Is going on with these creative endeavors, does that keep her alive with you, or is that triggering in a lot of ways? I know, Jimmy, you said you needed to take a step back. Getting back into it, is that helpful as you process your grief?
I think so. It's somewhat therapeutic for me. It's the first time I've written a script where I was like bawling the entire time I was writing. I mean, every scene I'd be like bawling, even the funny ones. I mean, I write comedy for a living generally, and these scenes are supposed to be funny, and I'm just crying and like, oh my God, this was so funny, but Melissa isn't here to do this anymore. So I mean, it's really emotionally charged in so many ways.
Andrew, how about you? Is it helpful?
I mean, it's still helpful for me. Yeah, absolutely. It's a pure positive to still work through it. It brings me closer to her. I think what I find is difficult, Jimmy, I'm 2.5 years in now. I want to say the first 8 months were cripplingly awful, inexpressibly awful.
And I'm on month 7.
Yeah, the grief was I used to think of a bayou, or like wetlands of grief. It comes at you in so many different ways. It's just hard to even pin it down. I never knew that grief was going to be that diverse. And you can hear it tonight on these different things that I'm talking about. Still traumatizing. But 2.5 years in, people expect your grief to turn. And for me, my grief began to turn a little bit around that 8-month period. I still was in extreme grief, but it felt as though I wasn't in cataclysmic. I wasn't, I had this agonizing kind of weeping. It didn't last long, but it would just be like heaving. And so I think I moved out of a kind of paralysis there. And then I think what became difficult for me, Abigail, is like, well, Anya, wanted me to live again. She wanted to make sure that she was the great love of my life, So Christian said, no ring. That's an easier thing to do. She wanted whoever was going to be in my life to be like the secondary love.
Yeah, I also said I couldn't have anyone as cool as her, or cooler than her.
Right. But you'd be surprised to learn that people probably don't want to be somebody's secondary love. And so, I think it's really, what's difficult is navigating, my continuing fidelity to Anya, my continuing love of Anya, my continuing the way that Anya is a part of my life on a daily basis with, how do you have friendships? How do you have relationships without losing those memories, but without letting those memories cast this shadow that will prevent anyone from being with you. I think I was writing those daily things that I would post on Instagram that were confessional in nature, in part as a message to the world, like, don't come near me. I don't want to, if you're interested or whatever. I wanted a space for grief without having to, without having anybody, I don't know. I'm on these widow, like, I don't know if Jimmy, you're on this, like, there are young widower or widower sites on Facebook, and a lot of people, sort of crave relationship right off the bat. And I totally understand. I would never judge anybody for it at all, but I didn't want to go down that road myself, in part because Anya has a poem where she makes fun of people who marry within a year of their wife's death. And I was like, oh God, I can't do that. But after a certain point, you do start scaring people away. because they feel like you're in an endless cycle of trauma, and that's not the reality when you write about it. It's just simply not. I didn't think of myself that way, but I think that was the message that was getting out there for friends and people in general. And so I think that's the difficult thing for me now, is trying to figure out how to continue to live with Anya while continuing to live with other people.
Yes, I think that poem, I think I remember that poem. She said some bad words about the person who moved on so quickly. So
Wasn't going to say it about me.
but what a great way to end here, though, in terms of, you have this experience with the great love of your life with your best friend, and then because you are still alive and your best friend is not, how do you create a life that both honors their memory but allows you to keep living? And isn't that something that everybody has to struggle with as we lose parents, siblings, people in our lives? I think back to Emily instructing Christian that she wanted him to find love. For me, when I first was diagnosed, I wanted to murder this fictional person who was going to take my place in the family. And I was very, very, very angry with that person. But then over the last nearly 4 years, gotten to understand that I don't need to be angry at that person, that whoever this person is who will fulfill that space in my family is somebody that I'm handing off a legacy to. And, I might have some instructions for that person, some very detailed, very specific instructions to that person. But that's life. That grief is something that doesn't end. It's not linear. It doesn't stop. But at the same time, just like that cat sitting in that bag, we do begin to normalize the situation, and we're able to then move on to the next step. So whatever people believe, I firmly believe that the people that we have lost are able to watch us, are able to see us after they are gone. And it gives me a lot of comfort to envision watching my family after I'm gone. So thank you both for being so vulnerable, for being transparent, for sharing your heart. And certainly I'll let Christian know this as well, but what a gigantic gift to speak this way to people who are going to be in your shoes. So thank you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for hosting it, and for just providing forums like this. You know how much I love you, Abigail, and think so much of you. Such a powerful voice, and such an incredible person, and I'm so lucky to know you.
Thank you.
I would like to chime in and say thank you to everyone. Also, I don't think I can be as eloquent as Abigail is and all of you. I would like to hold the space for the people who are scared and in panic and shy and watching this, and are the early stagers who are scared of recurrence, who are living with people who may be caregiving and etc. And so I think I started off the conversation saying this is a very uncomfortable topic for me, but I am a better person having been part of this, and I have to say thank you for allowing me to be on the back end of listening. Now I'm live. I know I'm like streaming all of this too, but I think there was like tears, laughter, sad, like there was all the emotions happening back here. And so I want to be present to share that side of reality. One of the burning questions, Andrew, that has come through the chat is, what is the name of your band? You've been referencing this music. And so we just need to know, how can we find you and what is this music?
Called Blue Sky Blue. But I've been thinking about putting out like just assembling songs that I'd written for Anya in that time in its own sort of format. But it's difficult. Well, anyway, yes, Blue Sky Blue, and those people are awesome and wonderful. There might be a few songs about this that are out there. We're recording this other album right now during COVID, which is impossible. But thank you for asking.
Yeah. I think COVID is like part 2 of this conversation. I think there were also some questions of, how do we navigate the support network that we need when there's COVID and we can't necessarily go out and have that coffee or walk or time at a friend's house. And so again, I I love the idea of saying their names out loud. I think that is incredibly important for Emily and Anya and Melissa. And I go back to Abigail, what you and I are doing every other Sunday, and we're bringing in people to talk about estate planning, to talk about the legal, to talk like we're doing this because there's so many questions around it. But one of the things that resonated with me with regards to this conversation was from a death doula who I didn't know much about a death doula until like I talked to this woman about helping us process death and go through death. And she said, I'm not worried about the patient who's passing. I'm worried about the family who's living. And I think that really sets the tone for what we're talking about tonight is we are still here. We are doing all of these things to remember our loved ones and their memory. And we're the ones who now are coping and grieving and need that support.
Absolutely. And that's such a great reminder, Laura, that you've made. I'll tell everybody that my one requirement of my husband when I was diagnosed was that he got a therapist, and he was in therapy the entire time that I'm living with this. And he has done that. And I think everybody talked about different ways of coping. And I think that everybody's individual, but at the same time, those of us who are living with a serious illness, whether it's terminal or not, somebody is examining every part of our body at, one time or another. And our caregivers need the same. They need somebody who is 190% or whatever gigantic number you can think of. My 5-year-old thinks 18,000 is the biggest number ever. So we'll just say 18,000%. On the side of the caregiver, because there needs to be somebody who's looking out and looking through the eyes of the caregiver completely. Otherwise, your perspective gets lost. So I'll just throw that in there. And yes, Andrew, you need to go get a therapist. A good one, though. A good therapist.
Yes, apparently no Play-Doh, right? So, well, I appreciate all of this conversation. I'm going to end this amazing 2-hour conversation that we had with all of our viewers, all of our listeners. And I know we talked about a lot of resources as well. So I'm going to follow up with all of you to make sure I have the right hyperlinks and we can direct people to all of your foundations and support services and music and art and books and all of that wonderful stuff, the plays, etc., which I think is really at the end of the day, we just want to get the information out there and we want to let people know that they're not alone going through any of this. And so there's a repository that we can start cultivating so people have access. And I really appreciate that. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
My pleasure.